She told me she was at book club, but I found her on vacation with my best friend. My name's Daniel, and for 8 years I believed I had the kind of marriage most people dreamed about. My wife, Claire, was warm, charming, and had a way of lighting up every room she walked into. Friends always told me how lucky I was, and I believed it. We had built a comfortable life in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago. Me working long hours in IT security, Claire running shifts at a boutique downtown. From the outside, we were solid, stable, a team. And every Thursday night, without fail, Claire had her book club. It was a standing ritual. She'd grab her tote bag, kiss me goodbye, and head out to meet the girls. She'd come back with a new paperback in her hand, chatting about storylines, characters, even quoting passages like she'd memorized them. I never once questioned her. Why would I? She was my wife, my partner, my person. But things started to change. So small at first that I almost gaslit myself into ignoring them. Claire began spending more time getting ready for book club than she ever did for our dates. The old jeans and cardigans were replaced with silk blouses, fitted dresses, and heels that clicked loudly against our hardwood floors. She'd linger at the mirror, applying perfume I hadn't smelled on her in years, the kind she used to wear when we first started dating. When I teased her about dressing up for her girlfriends, she'd laugh it off with a quick kiss, but there was something in her eyes I couldn't read. Then came the phone. She used to leave it lying around the house without a second thought. Now it was always face down, always locked, buzzing late at night with messages she answered quickly and silently. If I walked into the room, she'd turn the screen away or slide it into her pocket. When I asked about it, she got defensive, accusing me of being paranoid, reminding me how much she needed these nights with her friends to relax. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But one Thursday while she was gone, I logged into our shared Amazon account to order some work equipment. That's when I noticed something strange. Claire's purchase history, usually filled with books, was practically empty. No novels, no anthologies, nothing. In fact, she hadn't bought a single book in over half a year. My stomach dropped. For months she'd been coming home with books, acting as though she'd just picked them up from the club, as though she'd been reading. But the receipts didn't lie. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. It was like someone had cracked the foundation of my world open. My wife wasn't just hiding something. She was staging an entire performance for me. Every Thursday tote bag, every fake review of some book she never read, every smile as she told me about discussions with the girls. The realization was like a cold weight pressing down on my chest. Claire wasn't going to book club. She was going somewhere else. And whoever or whatever it was, she had gone to great lengths to cover her tracks. That night when she came home, still glowing, still carrying a brand new book like a prop, I smiled and played along. But inside, suspicion burned hotter than ever. And I knew I wasn't going to sit back and wonder anymore. I needed to know the truth. And I had no idea just how far that truth would push me. When the following Thursday rolled around, I decided I couldn't just sit and stew anymore. Claire slipped into a fitted black dress, sprayed a mist of perfume, and twirled her hair in the mirror. She looked radiant, but the kind of radiant that wasn't for me. My gut twisted as she grabbed her tote bag, kissed me on the cheek, and said she'd be late since the girls were planning a longer discussion that night. I smiled, pretended to believe her, and wished her fun. But this time, instead of turning on the TV and waiting for her return, I grabbed my car keys and followed. I kept a few cars back, careful not to draw attention. She drove downtown, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd been wrong. She pulled into the parking lot of a popular cafe, the kind that actually could host a book club. Relief almost washed over me, until she walked right past the cafe doors, heels clicking against the sidewalk, and climbed into a silver SUV that had just pulled up. My heart sank when I saw who was driving. It was Nick, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been in my wedding party, the man who'd spent countless weekends at my house, drinking beers on the back porch, laughing with me about everything under the sun. I sat frozen in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Claire leaned over and kissed him. Soft, familiar, like it wasn't the first time. My chest burned, my stomach churned, and every memory of trust I'd had in both of them shattered in seconds. I wanted to slam the horn, jump out, scream, expose them right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was rage twisting into cold calculation. Instead, I kept following. They drove across the city, eventually stopping at a hotel downtown. A hotel. Not a cozy little bar, not a restaurant, just straight to a hotel. My mind screamed at me, but my body stayed still, locked in the sick realization that everything I thought I knew about Claire and Nick was a lie. They disappeared inside together, laughing, holding hands like teenagers sneaking off. I sat there for what felt like hours, fury boiling inside me, but one thought cutting through the chaos. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. Not just for me, but because if I was going to confront Claire and Nick, I was going to destroy them with the truth they'd tried to bury. And deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just an affair. This was a betrayal that went far deeper than I was prepared for. I didn't sleep that night. Every memory of Nick, my best man, the guy who taught me how to change a tire, the one who'd pulled me out of more bad decisions than I could count, felt poisoned. I scrolled Claire's messages until my thumb cramped, piecing together a timeline of lies. Late-night texts, hotel confirmations, coy check-ins. But the proof I needed wasn't in messages anymore. It was in travel plans. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Within 48 hours, the PI had what I asked for. Screenshots of booking confirmations, a credit card receipt in Nick's name for a seaside rental, timestamps showing them checking into a boutique hotel 3 hours outside the city this past weekend. Same hotel chain, with a sister property 2 states away, the perfect little romantic hideaway. They'd booked a week. They'd posted photos on an alt account, sneaky sunlit shots of Claire in a straw hat, Nick with his arm around her, captions that read like private jokes. Finally, breathe. I felt every laugh they'd shared like a slap. I could have called them. I could have shown up to the house and screamed until my voice broke. But I'd learned something in the military. Timing matters. Precision matters. If I was going to do this, I wanted it to be clean, undeniable, and unforgettable. So I booked a flight. Not some nosy, angry show-up trip. No. I booked a room at the very same resort they'd reserved, under a different name. I packed light, wore my oldest jeans and a cap low over my eyes, and told exactly one person what I was doing. My brother. Because if this went sideways, I didn't want to be alone. Arriving felt surreal. The resort smelled like sunscreen and expensive cologne, laughter and cocktail umbrellas everywhere. Families and couples milled around. Nobody had the faintest clue what was about to unfold. I checked in, and they handed me a key card with a smile. My heart hammered in my chest, not from fear, but from the strange, cold fury that had settled in like armor. I went straight to the pool area, scanning faces, the tan lines, the sunglasses, the guilty sidelong glances, but I kept myself contained. I ordered a drink, watched the tide, and let the sun do its honest thing, illuminate everything it touched. On the second day, I finally saw them. From across the chaise lounges, Nick and Claire emerged, laughing like teenagers, the kind of easy laughter I used to hear on our back porch. They were hand in hand, oblivious, too wrapped up in each other to notice the world. Seeing Nick's profile, his jaw, his familiar smirk, was like watching a movie where the villain wore sweatpants. My hands went numb, my stomach clenched, but I didn't move. I let him smile. I let them settle into their bubble. When Claire turned and caught my eye, only for a blink, her expression registered something like alarm, then calculation. She mouthed my name, but I stayed still. That night, I did what I should have done first. I gathered my evidence, and I called the one person I knew would never let him off easy, Nick's wife, Sarah. Her voice on the phone was sharp, incredulous, then furious. "You got to be kidding me," she said. "Nick?" Number, not my Nick. I sent her pictures. Nick with his arm around Claire under the palm trees, the blurry shot of them checking in together. There was a long pause, and then I heard her inhale, hard. "I'll be there," she said, every word a blade. I didn't want a fight that tore up the resort. I wanted a moment that stripped every mask they wore. So we planned it quiet and simple. Sarah would walk over casually the next morning, look like any other guest, then call out to Nick by name. No shouting, no cinematic confrontation, just the collapse of an illusion in full daylight. I slept poorly, mind racing, not because I feared the aftermath, but because I finally felt the weight of truth, and it was heavier than I imagined. The next morning, sun felt like an accomplice, bright, unforgiving. I sat at the pool bar pretending to read a magazine while my lungs burned and my hands shook. I watched them from the corner of my eye as they lounged by the water, him leaning back with his arms slung around her shoulders, her head tipped laughing the way it used to tip against my chest. It felt like watching my life being lived by someone else in high definition. Then I saw Sarah. She moved through the crowd like a woman with purpose, not fury, because fury had its place, but purpose would end this farce. She was wearing sunglasses, but I could hear the quick, precise click of her heels. She walked straight up to Nick, who was mid-sentence, and said his name like she'd called him to dinner. "Nick," she said, bright, loud enough to break through the dozen conversations around the pool. He glanced up, grin intact. Then it all fell apart. Recognition hit him like cold water. His eyes darted from Sarah to Claire to me. Then he froze. For a second, he just stared, the kind of blank stare men get when something they've banked on for years collapses in a single heartbeat. "Sarah?" he fumbled, voice thin. "What are you—" Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just looked at him, incredulous and steady. "We need to talk," she said, and the words were a folding chair snapping open. People started to notice. Heads turned. Phones tilted as instinct, human and ugly, pushed strangers toward observation. Claire's face changed in front of my eyes. It shifted from glossy vacation bliss to the wan mask of panic. She stood up so fast the towel fell from her lap, and her smile crashed. "Daniel," she mouthed, but it wasn't my name she was saying. It was a prayer, a curse, a realization. Nick tried to reach for Sarah's hand, like this was a misunderstanding that could be rearranged into ordinary life. She pulled back, like the contact had burned her. "You betrayed us," she said, the sound low but carrying. "You lied to all of us." She didn't shout. No theatrics. Just those 3 words, precise as a surgeon's cut. I watched him crumble. His jaw trembled. He opened his mouth. Nothing. For the first time, I saw the boy I'd once dragged out of trouble, the friend who'd laughed over bad decisions, the man who'd thought himself untouchable. He shrank. Then Claire lunged for him, more frantic than I'd ever seen her. "Nick, please. It's not what you think. We're just—" She couldn't finish the sentence because the people around us had begun to murmur. A couple beside the pool nudged each other and turned their phones toward the scene. A child pointed. A server froze with a tray in hand. The resort, a bubble of vacation anonymity, was punctured. I didn't move right away. Part of me wanted to charge forward, to tear them apart with words that would never undo the pain. But instead, I folded the magazine, stood, and walked toward them the way a man walks when he's decided anybody watching will know who owns the truth. Claire caught sight of me then. The moment her eyes finally found mine was like a shutter snapping shut. The color drained from her face. I stopped a few feet away, the pool noise humming behind us. Nick looked at me, and whatever plan he'd had to charm or deflect fizzled. I flicked my phone open and, without theatrics, showed Sarah the photos I'd taken. Claire and Nick, hands intertwined by the hotel fountain. The confirmation email for a week's stay. The receipt in his name. No captions, no accusations, just evidence. Sarah looked, then looked at him. then at me. Her face crumpled. Not with rage now, but with a hurt so raw it made my own chest ache. "You lied to me," she said to him, a question that was also a verdict. Nick tried to speak. He scrambled for something that sounded like an excuse. And then, absurdly, he looked to the crowd like he expected them to take his side. They didn't. Phones lifted, whispers sharpened into pointed glances. Someone said, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "Is that—" And the rumor engine started rolling. Claire's collapse was immediate. She wrapped her arms around herself like she could hold herself together, but there was no holding. "Daniel," she wailed, finally saying my name aloud, but it was thin, weak, and small. "Please, don't do this here." I could have yelled at her then, called her every name my blood wanted to call. Instead, I felt empty. Not because I'd been cheated on, but because the person I loved most had chosen to unravel the things she swore to protect. "This is where you did it," I said quietly, not for the crowd, but for her. "You chose this life. You chose him." And now everyone knows security appeared at a distance, the kind of quiet uniform that signals escalation. The resort manager hovered, apologetic and mortified for the disturbance. Sarah stepped closer to Nick and whispered something in his ear. Cold, final words. He went pale, and then, as if the last thread tethering him to this moment snapped, he turned away and walked off, shoulders hunched, leaving Claire standing alone like a prop with no scene left. People began to drift back to their conversations, the holiday bubble repairing itself as quickly as gossip could dissolve it into the ether. But the marks were left, the slow-motion collapse of a marriage in full view, the friend turned traitor, the woman who had built a life on deceit. I didn't shout or claim victory. I simply stood there, heart loud, as Claire crumpled onto a nearby chaise and covered her face. The man I had called my best friend had walked away. The woman I had trusted with my life was reduced to a heap of sobs in the sand. And in the middle of it all, under a sun that showed nothing mercy, I realized the next steps weren't about theatrics. They were about finishing what I'd started. Quietly, carefully, dragging every sunlit lie into the light until there was nothing left for them to hide behind. The resort emptied into a low, embarrassed hum after Nick slipped away. People returning to their towels, bartenders resuming their gossip, lifeguards pretending not to watch. Claire crouched on the chaise, shoulders shaking, fingers fumbling with the hem of her cover-up like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. Sarah stood beside her like a blade, quiet, composed, the kind of woman who'd been betrayed and had decided in an instant she wouldn't be naive about it again. I felt a strange mixture of triumph and nausea. Seeing them fall was justice, but it didn't taste like I thought it would. It tasted hollow. "Do you want me to call someone?" Sarah asked me once the first storm of gawking had settled. Her voice was steady but raw. I shook my head. "No, let him go. Right now he needs to figure out he can't run from this." She nodded, tears gone, replaced by a rigid sort of resolve that made me respect her even more. Claire finally dragged herself up, face blotched, mascara streaming like paint. She stared at me, and there was something in her eyes that wasn't just fear. It was the knowledge that the life she built on little white lies was detonating around her. "Daniel, please," she said, voice thin, "don't make this worse than it already is." I looked at her for a long beat, at the woman who'd fallen asleep in my arms, who'd once whispered promises of forever, and felt the memory like a bruise. "You already did," I said quietly. "You made it worse." Then, because I didn't want to leave anything to chance, I turned to the resort manager who'd hovered nearby, trying to be polite but obviously wanting nothing to do with our collapse. "I'd like to see the registration for that room," I said. He blinked, clearly unprepared for a request that didn't come wrapped in a lawsuit or a press call. "Sir, I can't release guest information without—" "I understand," I cut in, "but there are extenuating circumstances. Evidence of adultery, fraud. If you won't help, I'll make sure corporate knows how you treated victims on your property." I didn't intend to threaten. I was stating fact. The manager swallowed and, after pacing a little, led us toward the desk with a forced courtesy. The front desk clerk, visibly uncomfortable, pulled up the reservation log. The name on the booking matched the confirmation number the PI had sent me. Nick had booked under his own card. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. Then the clerk handed over a stack of paper receipts when I asked for copies. The credit card charges were in Nick's name. The dates aligned. It was clinical, humiliating proof. A trail of plastic and numbers that confirmed what my gut had already known. I felt my hands go cool as I scrolled through the images on my phone. The doubt that had once gnawed at me settling into a dull, steady certainty. "Thank you," I said to the manager, and the words tasted like ash. I pocketed the receipts and the pictures. Evidence, I thought. Concrete things that would mean more than the screams in a parking lot ever could. Back near the pool, people were whispering, some glancing at Claire with pity, others with judgment. I could see her mother across the lawn on her phone, already in motion. I wondered if Claire had ever imagined this scene as a possible outcome when she first began lying. Did guilt ever twinge? Had she rehearsed the lies, tightened them like straps, convinced herself they were harmless? The thing that stung worst wasn't the motel rooms or the photos. It was the betrayal by someone I'd trusted with my life. Nick had been more than a friend. He'd been a brother by choice. And watching him walk away, shoulders rounded and face drained of bravado, felt like a knife wrapped in the memory of 1,000 shared beers and bad advice. I didn't want this to descend into spectacle. I wanted it to be surgical. So I made the decisions that would take it from a messy poolside collapse to something that would follow them home. Proof to back up every accusation, a trail that couldn't be spun into a misunderstanding. Sarah and I walked to the resort office together after a long silence. She'd taken a breath and said something that cut through the fog. "I'll get a statement together. I don't want to just yell. I want this recorded." She already had a steadiness that made plans. I handed her the pictures I'd taken, the confirmation emails, the PI's packet I'd printed in haste the night before. She read them with her jaw set, and when she looked up, there were no tears. Only sharpened focus. "I want him to know there are consequences," she said. "Not just for sleeping around, but for lying to people who loved him." I agreed. I spent the afternoon doing the things pain makes men do. Logistics disguised as practicalities. I texted my brother, told him the situation, and asked him to keep an eye on our house. I sent copies of the reservation and the receipt to an email folder I created titled, simply, Evidence, Claire/Nick. I called the PI back and asked him to expand his surveillance, to get more timestamps, more photos, any communication between them that could be turned into a timeline. He said he'd been expecting a follow-up and promised to dig deeper. When I returned to the chaise where Claire knelt, she was silent, collapsed with her head in her hands. People watched as if this were the closing scene of a drama. I sat down across from her, but didn't reach for her. There was no balm I could offer that would stitch this back together. She flinched as if I'd struck her. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally, voice raw. "Right now," I said, "I'm going to make sure your lies aren't just rumors. I'm going to make them evidence. I'm going to make sure the people you lied to, your mother, your friends, your co-workers, know the truth. I'm going to make sure there's a paper trail you can't walk back from." The anger in my chest had cooled into something like resolve. "And I'm going to make sure Nick understands what he's thrown away." She tried to bargain, a million rehearsed pleas spilling out, blame, excuses, promises, but they landed like wet paper. Sarah gave a single, fatal look and left, phone already in hand to call Nick's wife's lawyer. I watched her go and felt the last threads of my old life loosen. It was brutal and necessary. I'd chosen precision over scene making because scars are longer lasting when cut clean. That night, in a cheap motel a few miles from the resort because I couldn't bring myself to sleep at home with the echo of laughter still in my ears, I uploaded copies of the receipts and photos to a secure cloud folder, then emailed links to 3 addresses: Claire's mother, Nick's wife, and a trusted old friend who worked in HR at Nick's company. I didn't include commentary, just the evidence, a quiet act of closure. I let the files speak. Sleep was impossible. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages of support from friends, a stunned voicemail from Nick's sister asking if it was true. But also a text from Claire that read, "Please, don't. I'm sorry. I love you." I stared at it until the words blurred, then deleted it. The apology felt worthless coming from her. After everything, "I love you" was just a line in the play she'd been performing. As dawn crept over the hotel blinds, I realized the shape of what was coming into focus. A legal mess, shattered friendships, questions to family and employers. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be clean. People would take sides. Some would call me cruel, some would call me righteous. But I felt the truth settle into me like cooling iron. I'd unearthed a deception, and I would see it through. Not out of vengeance alone, but because this was about not letting a life be stolen without consequence. I checked my phone, and, for the first time since the pool, felt a sliver of calm. There would be hard conversations, messy fallout, and an inevitable path forward. Divorce maybe, or at least a reckoning. But I also felt a strange, careful relief. The lie had been exposed. The people responsible would have to live with it. And whatever came next, I would not be gaslit into silence again.
That evening, Claire showed up at our hotel room door with swollen eyes and trembling hands, begging me to talk. She claimed Nick had manipulated her, that it wasn't what it looked like, that she still loved me. I stood there, silent, letting her words tumble over themselves. Finally, I cut her off. "You didn't just lie to me, Claire. You lied to yourself, and now everyone knows who you really are." I shut the door on her face, leaving her sobs echoing in the hallway. The next morning, Sarah and I sat together at breakfast when Nick walked in alone, scanning the room nervously. His confident swagger was gone. He looked smaller, weaker. Sarah didn't hesitate. She waved him over with a smile that could cut glass. When he reached the table, she leaned in and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You destroyed 2 families in 1 week. Hope it was worth it." Nick's face drained of color, and for once, the man who always had something to say was speechless. Later that day, I checked out of the resort, suitcase in hand, ready to put distance between myself and the wreckage. As I passed through the lobby, I spotted Claire sitting alone, mascara streaked, staring blankly at her phone. She looked up, eyes pleading, as if one glance could undo everything. I didn't stop. I walked straight past her, out the glass doors, and into the sunlight. For the first time in years, I felt free, like I wasn't the fool anymore. Back home, the fallout hit fast. Friends who once praised Claire and Nick as so fun together turned cold the moment the truth spread. Sarah made sure the neighborhood knew exactly what had happened, and suddenly Nick's phone repair shop lost customers overnight. Claire, meanwhile, tried to reach me through mutual friends, claiming she wanted closure. But I didn't entertain it. I was done being her safety net. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, cutting off every string that tied me to her betrayal. Weeks later, divorce papers were signed, and Claire moved out of the house we once built together. I didn't feel anger anymore, just relief. My brother and Sarah threw a small cookout to celebrate new beginnings, and as we sat around the fire, I realized betrayal hadn't broken me. It had set me free. I looked around at the people who stayed true, who had my back when it mattered most, and I swore to myself, never again would I ignore the cracks in the story. Trust, once shattered, was gone forever, but in its place, I found something stronger: clarity.